If you're a professional S&C coach, I expect that you're doing gym workouts. I don't need you to show me like you're doing a deadlift. Just get on with it. Until you've been sacked, you've not really worked in the game, because that then gets shared around. Normally, we try and have that in everybody's hand within 30 minutes of the game. At the end of a Tuesday night, I'd finish at literally at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning at Ipswich. If somebody in the rehab department wants to look at the progression of their player over the last 20 weeks, they can see all of that. But if the coach also wants to see how much S&C work has been done by X player in the last period of time, he can also see that. So when does the player separate from the person? Where's the boundary between them living their life as a person or them living their life as an athlete? I think our greatest challenge inside the club is, what is the player doing, with who, when, and how is that going to affect us when they come back? And I think football's got to be really careful, as other sports, is how deep you want to go with some of this stuff. Now,
hello and welcome back to my channel, and today's guest is Dave Carolan, who has spent almost 30 years working in elite sport, with his most recent position being Head of Performance and Health at Millwall Football Club. So I was really keen to speak to Dave about his career to date, so how that has changed from when he first started up until now, and how he's able to adapt and always seemingly keep on top of the different trends in such an ever changing industry such as sports science. So Dave has worked with many different players, coaches, managers, and different practitioners over time. He was open to share things such as what he gets up to in his different roles and what, how that's changed over time as well. But also he was very kind to give some great advice as well. So if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the channel below. But without further ado, let's get into the conversation with Dave Carolan. Dave, welcome to the channel. How are you doing today?
oh well, Chris, thank you very much, and honoured to be invited on to speak to you.
No, I'm glad to have you on. I've been probably wanting you on for a while, to be honest. So I'm happy that we've managed to get this down. So it's one of them. When I was kind of planning for this and kind of wondering what to ask you and speak about, I had to kind of be a bit selective, because you've had a career so far that's spanned a long time. So I've got your LinkedIn profile up. We're going to talk about some of the things. We're going to talk about bits of advice for students, etc. So in terms of what I would normally do to start, Dave, I'll pass it back over to you. So I'm sure many people that are watching this probably have heard of you before, maybe have worked with you before, etc. But for those that don't, just give a quick overview, brief kind of snapshot of who you are, Dave, and what you kind of get up to.
Well, yeah, hopefully it's not infamous. My nature, people have come across me, but yeah, Dave Carolan. I've been a performance scientist, sports scientist, and all of the different disciplines that used to involve back in the day when I first started off. I went to University of St Mary's in London. I came over from Ireland because there wasn't actually any sports science related degrees in Ireland at that time. So followed a well-beaten path from Ireland to St Mary's. And while I was there, I was playing a decent level of rugby. So I was at London Irish, which was only a few miles down the road from the college. So it was great. I was able to study and I was able to continue with my playing. And then, similar to all those referees who've all got a story about an injury, about 2 years into my career at London Irish, it was still amateur, and a back injury kept me out for the best part of 3 years. And in that time, concentrated on my sports science work, and actually became kind of part of there wasn't actually like a formal backroom staff, but I was one of the guys who was volunteering I was videoing the games on a Saturday. So I was stood up in a gantry. So I'd train in the morning, I'd play in the morning with the development squad or the under-21s. And then I'd stand up in a gantry during the first team game, and then started traveling around with them. I was also now, once I'd completed my degree and was doing my master's, I started managing a sports injury clinic, and we had the contract with London Irish for all the kind of S&C provision and all of that kind of stuff, which was rugby just gone pro. So we were starting out with this whole new way of doing things. It was probably more advanced than football was at that stage. So yeah, a great time to kind of dive into early sports science career. You could make all the mistakes you wanted, and you were learning along the way. I mean, not all the mistakes you wanted, but you can make a fair few of them, because there was nobody to judge you against. There wasn't a Twitter profile that you had to be like measured off. And then spun in from that, I worked at the Science Museum in London for about 18 months on an exhibition there on science and sport, and then was also dovetailing that with cricket. So yeah, 2 years with Surrey County Cricket Club. That was more the kind of sports therapy, a little bit of light rehab S&C, because cricket wasn't really doing that either. Yeah. And then a good friend of mine, a long-time mentor and friend, Joe Dunbar, and his associate Keith Power, asked me if I'd be interested in getting involved in a project that they had on the go, which was going to be in football. And I got offered a role to work in football. Strangely enough, though, I had to accept the role before I knew where it was. Such was the secrecy behind this big deal.
Yeah.
And anyway, lo and behold, I rolled up at Norwich City in 1998. And my career in football has kind of continued from then across many clubs, which I'm sure we'll touch upon.
Yeah, definitely. No, that was good. I mean, yeah. So the career so far spanning what, kind of nearly 30 years in elite sport, then,
Yeah,
Dave?
yeah, we're near up on 30 years now. Yeah, and don't have the grey hairs to show it, you know. And
Yeah, the grey
maybe
beard. The beard's a bit
the
grey.
grey beard is out in force. Yeah,
Definitely. So yeah, because you asked me actually before we started recording in terms of the kind of people that will listen to this and view this video. So you know, a lot of them will be students, a lot of them be early in their careers. And just to put it into perspective, because obviously I've got your LinkedIn open, like I say, and the first thing listed on there is back in 1995. So a lot of the people that are watching this probably not even born back then, Dave. So, and that's not to make you sound old; that's to make you sound very wise. So, yeah, you've got lots of
experienced.
experience, exactly. So you actually mentioned it there. So you come from originally the rugby background, but then you mentioned cricket, obviously football, and then it's not just the strength and conditioning and the sports science; it's the analysis, the coaching. So you've kind of encompassed almost everything really over that time period. So I think what I'd like to ask you then, David, firstly, is in terms of what would you put it down to that you managed to last so long? Like how can you what's kind of been a key driver in that longevity for you to be able to because the industry, which again would lead to another question, it's probably changed so much in that time. So you know, all the technology that you now have, the data and stuff like that. So what would you put that longevity down to, Dave, from your perspective?
I suppose I've always had a thirst to work in this industry, so that's been a hunger probably since my teenage years, is to be involved in elite sport, a professional sport. Of course, like every kid who's interested in playing sport, you want to play. And it would be great to be a professional footballer or now rugby player or whatever. And not everyone is necessarily blessed with either the gifts to do that or the pathway to achieve that. You know, maybe they had talent, but they didn't get scouted, and they'll be forever one of the greatest Sunday League players that never got scouted and can tell great stories about trials they had. But I always had a hunger to work in this industry. And I was also probably fortunate with my parents, who were very encouraging, siblings who were very competitive, not necessarily directly. We've all kind of been pretty high achievers in all of the areas that we've gone into in our lives. So I think that kind of that competitiveness to achieve and also to stay ahead of the game. That means you've got to be inquisitive. You've got to, you know, look for opportunities to improve yourself, improve your trade and your craft, and also be good at building relationships. You know, and I don't claim to be the best person at building relationships, but built at least strong enough relationships with the right people at the right times to ensure that you keep moving forward. Now, at times, has there been bumps on the road? Of course, there has been. You know, where opportunities have been lost or removed or missed. So it's never plain sailing. I didn't start at point A and just travel on this line to where I am now in my career without having setbacks. But it's about kind of rolling with the punches when they do come. You know, if you work in professional sport, at some stage you're probably going to be sacked, or you're going to lose your position. And I suppose there's a running joke among some of the older statespeople around there that until you've been sacked, you've not really worked in the game, because it is that kind of appreciation that maybe fans don't know about, or people who haven't worked in it. You know, they see a manager sacked and think, all right, great, new manager, but there can be knock-on effects. So, but certainly those things are important, but also loyalty, I think, is something that's always run through me, is that I'm loyal to employers. I'm loyal to people who probably, you know, engage with me in the right way. I'll always give them loyalty back. And that's why I think, especially in football, I've done kind of 3 spells. I've done a spell at Norwich where I lasted 10 years. So other opportunities presented themselves, but I stuck with the club. I then, the second role at Colchester was kind of being loyal to my family, because they were then in those kind of important development years. So while there were opportunities to move to work with England Rugby and various other clubs as well, for my family, those 7 years were about ensuring I was here all the time, or as much as possible. So a lot of commuting. And then the last one's been loyal to a manager. So I've kind of had a club, family, manager, where it's, with Gary Rowett now since 2015, we've worked together at 4 clubs. So yeah, not being overly pushed on chasing money or chasing opportunities. Sometimes you have to set some roots in something.
Yeah, definitely. So you mentioned there 4 clubs with Gary Rowett, which are Birmingham, Derby, Stoke, and most recently Millwall. So what would you put that down to, Dave? Is it just how well you get along with each? And when did that relationship first start? Was that from the Birmingham time? Was it that you first worked with him?
Yeah. So Gary had gone into Birmingham from Burton. He'd been doing really good stuff at Burton, had gone into Birmingham, and a few months after that, I got a phone call from Darren Robinson, who had worked with Gary at Birmingham, and they'd known each other from kind of work they had done together at the FA, and they wanted to add additional expertise, let's call it, into the sports science department, maybe a bit of an older, wiser head. I use that, kind of guided, because there were some really good practitioners there, but I think they also wanted someone maybe who was coming from outside of the building, who maybe hadn't been part of the furniture as such at Birmingham for a while. So I went to meet Gary. I went overdressed because I'm a bit old school like that. I thought I'd go kind of well presented for the interview, and met him in Birmingham, and then you realise that Gary's character were quite similar in a lot of ways, and so he was in quite relaxed, casual gear, not super casual, but smart casual. So I was a little bit overdressed, but we had a really informal, formal interview, and across that, there were a few questions he asked me about my philosophies of how I trained, which are still rooted in some of the real basics. Didn't have to get overcomplicated about stuff. And one of the questions he asked me at the time was, "Do you believe in running?" And within the context of football conditioning, do you think we should get the players on a line or do conditioning without the ball? And I said, yeah, my whole career has been built around that. When I want to build on a specific element of the game, sometimes you can overcomplicate it by trying to wrap coaching around it, or a football philosophy, maybe kind of from the Verheyen kind of stuff that had been going on for a few years. Everybody was now into, shouldn't be doing this isolated fitness work. It should all be with the ball. And we understood that, but sometimes you just wanted to get players on the line. And I think that answer kind of matched us together in terms of how we looked at things, among other bits as well. But probably came out of that thinking, right, well, let's give this a go. And then it's gone together quite well over the years. We kind of know each other's ways of working inside out. I understand his philosophy of how he wants to play the game and how he wants to train, and how we also manage groups of people, be they staff or players. We're almost one step ahead of each other in each other's department. He knows what I'm probably going to be talking about, and I know where he's probably going to want to go. So but we're both able to obviously do our own thing. We also know what the other one's probably going to come in with. So yeah, it's good working relationship.
Yeah, perfect. So then there was four teams I mentioned there, but you also said kind of Colchester and stuff like that. So in terms of when you first go into a new club then, Dave, what's the kind of initial steps that you would take, to go in there? Obviously there's a department already in there and you're going in as a new person. So how does that look, and how do you kind of see that kind of whole journey from stepping into a new club and trying to put your stamp on it, but also not just, completely change things and kind of hopefully make it a better department?
Yeah, there's a few things I do. I've got my own kind of internal auditing document that I look at. So what provision do we have at the club across people, across facilities and equipment, and the philosophy that exists there. So again, it's quite easy to come in and say, this is how we're doing things, and everybody better get in line very, very quickly. But sometimes you can go in and there's really good work going on, potentially better work than you were doing. So why would you suddenly get rid of all that? So very, very quickly, it's trying to establish, terra firma, what's available to me to work here, who's available to me, and what's their scope and breadth of work. And then what situation are we in? Are we in a a situation where we're trying to pick up a team that's struggling, or we're going into what's already a pretty good environment and then trying to kick that on even further? Or are you going in to stabilize? Are you replacing somebody who's just left, or are you adding to a department that's already in existence?
Yeah.
So I think that's the first thing you're going to do. And you can do that pretty quickly. You know, that's kind of within the first few days, you can kind of have boxed off most of those elements. And then we're going into kind of what needs to be changed immediately. You know, it's the classic 90, 100 day change philosophy. What do we need to change immediately because it's not good? What is something that we can work towards changing, and what are we leaving alone? So I think when you start boxing things off into those kind of categories, you can very quickly stop things, start other things within a few days, or certainly within a couple of weeks. Some of the other long-standing things might just take time, which is, if you suddenly realize, for example, that the reporting isn't up to the kind of level that you would expect. Okay, that might be having to build out databases. It might be constructing reports in whatever visualization software that you want to use. You can't necessarily just do that straight away. Or if you were to do it straight away, you may not do it right straight away. So I think there's also a really important bit, which is like getting buy-in from the staff that are there. So, for example, at some of the clubs to go in and we very quickly present our philosophy of how we play the game and how we train to play the game, and how each of the departments are going to filter into how we achieve that. So be that the strength and conditioning team, this is how we look at the Monday. For example, Saturday game, Monday for us, a number of years ago, it was always seen as an off-feet day, off-feet recovery day, second day recovery, whatever you want to call it. And suddenly all players and a lot of staff were saying, that's it, everybody's off feet, they're on bikes, they're foam rolling, they're doing nothing, because that's optimized recovery. And while we understood that was a philosophy, our way of training was active recovery. And we're going to use the time to work on maybe something that's a bit more technical, low intensity, but active. So we wanted them on the pitch, because those small moments of talking with people or, spending time on the grass were important to us. So at a lot of clubs where you're having to tweak that philosophy, it's got to happen quick, but we have to get buy-in from the staff. So presenting our philosophy to them helps that early stage journey when you move in.
Yeah. And one thing you said there, Dave, was when you go in there, obviously you've got to be aware of the ideas and the things that are already happening, because sometimes they're good and they're better than you may have done in previous clubs. So in terms of then, how do you deal with the changing landscape in terms of keeping up with the trends? And, the people that are coming through now are, 18, 19, 20, early 20s, and they're learning things at uni that you didn't learn, obviously, at that time. And so you've got to stay on top of the curve. So what would you say that you kind of do? How are you kind of keeping on top of things? And, you've obviously done that over this long period, otherwise you wouldn't still be in the game. So can you touch upon a little bit about that, Dave, if possible?
Yeah, I think I've always been inquisitive. So I'm not someone that'll sit down and watch TV. Unfortunately for my family, sometimes they're in there and I'm in here because I'm watching a podcast, YouTube, reading a paper, not a newspaper, but, reading some research or something like that. Because again, you have to stay ahead. Like, why am I going to be more employable, or how am I going to be more useful in the organization I'm going to be if I'm behind the curve? I think I learned that around my kind of 7th or 8th year at Norwich. So I was now in my mid-30s. I was, pretty rock solid, I thought, in my job. I was doing a good job. We were competing reasonably in the Championship. We'd been in the Premier League. We'd won the league a few years ago. And I probably fell into that ego trap of thinking, we've cracked this. And because of where we are geographically out on the East Coast here in England, I probably stopped going to as many conferences as I probably had in the past. Not through any kind of massive ego, but I had a young family, and I was probably thinking, well, if I go away for 2 days or that, my wife might might not be appreciative of the fact that I was going off investing in myself, and of course she never said that, but that was just something that was in my head. So I chose not to maybe go to as many things. And then a couple of years later, I realized I just hadn't been investing in myself and my trade. So I started kicking off back out on the road, going to as many things as I could. Of course, another couple of years, the kids were a little bit older. And then it wasn't long after that actually I left Norwich, not through choice, got asked to leave as such. And then you realise, wow, I'm not really where I should have been. Both in terms of my network wasn't as strong as it was still strong, but it wasn't as strong as it could have been. And you had missed some of the developments because maybe sometimes you have another challenge back then where, you didn't have things like Zoom that we're doing now. So to get technology companies or whatever to make the trek as they saw it it sounds like it's in the Himalayas somewhere, but the trek to Norfolk is seen as a difficult thing to do. And some of them just didn't make the journey out to Norwich. So I wasn't going the other way. They weren't coming to me, and suddenly you realize that some of these innovations had potentially passed you by. So I then made a commitment to myself probably at around the mid to late 2000s is I'm not going to get caught out with being behind the curve again. So even in the last week, I've spoken to about 6 different companies on wearables, AI, VR, technologies, softwares, constantly on the phone to people, trying to go into other places. I've got to stay ahead of that stuff because if I'm going to be asked to work at this level again, I better know what I'm kind of talking about, but also better be aware of the other bits, like the 21-year-olds who are coming out with, new methods of S&C that, yes, I wasn't exposed to, but I need to be aware of. I don't necessarily need to know them all, but I need to be aware of them because I then can empower other people who are specialists to go and do that good work.
Yeah. So just kind of comparing it to my is analysis, that's my kind of background, that's what I know. Yeah. So if I go back kind of when I was at uni, a typical team would have a first team analyst and a sports scientist, and the analyst role, from what I can see, is obviously changed a lot. You're now having data analysts, recruitment analysts, first team, opposition, set piece. So I'm presuming the same has kind of happened or something similar for your field as well, Dave. So that kind of sports scientist, can you kind of give a bit of an overview of what that now encompasses and what's maybe new that it didn't maybe touch upon? And do you have a focus where, would you say you're in a particular part of sports science in terms of your skill set? Or do you like to kind of be a bit across the whole kind of board, really? Or do you have a niche down area?
I suppose, yes, as a head of performance, or my last title, head of performance and health, it's an umbrella term because you oversee or you're responsible for a number of different departments and then all the disciplines that fall within those. So that could include in performance, sports science, which is different from being a fitness coach, which I would see as somebody who's on field, an S&C coach who I would see as being largely gym based, not of course exclusively. Then you've also got nutrition, you've got psychology, then you've got the crossover then where you've got rehabilitation science, which is bridging that kind of performance area that's looking at the team and obviously the fit players who are active and the rehabilitating players coming back from injury. And that again now has started to become a specialist area. And then you would also then interact very closely with the medical team in terms of the doctor, physios, chiropractors, sports therapists, podiatrists, whoever else might be part of that squad.
Yeah.
Because they are practically a squad now. I was talking to somebody yesterday and we were talking about the old team photos where I've got one at Norwich where it's manager, assistant manager, physio, me.
Yeah.
And there was a kit man, but unfortunately Terry wasn't invited to the photo, but there were 4 people. There wasn't a first team coach. There wasn't a goalkeeping coach. There was no analyst, no nutrition. We did actually have a nutritionist. But when I originally went in, we were quite innovative. So Joe and Keith had brought in, Joe was, a high-level physiologist. He was working with multiple world champions across multiple sports and had worked in Premier League teams. Keith was a psychologist. We had Jane Griffin, who was the British Olympic team nutritionist. And then we had Sarah Schenker, who was the club dietitian. And then myself as the multidisciplinary sports scientist. But on a day-to-day basis, it was me and I was covering everything. So let's look at it now. If you look at analysis, most clubs now will have minimum 2 analysts. Then you will either have a specialist analyst who's looking at restarts, set pieces, whatever you want to call it. You'll have scouting analysts. You may have a coach analyst as well, who's somebody who's got similar to Joe Connell, who I've worked with at a number of clubs, who's been part of our group as well, who was one of the first kind of technical analysts. So performance analyst becomes part of the coaching staff. So he's now more grass focused as well as doing all the opposition stuff. You can have opposition and self-analysis as well. So even in that, like, that's 6-7 people.
Yeah.
When I started, I was running around doing all of that and then trying to learn this. I think we had the first digitally based analysis system in the country, but that was, originally it was tape to tape. I did 2 years moonlighting between Norwich and Ipswich, so I'd have a stack of 20 tapes at the end of a Tuesday night. I'd finish literally at 3-4 o'clock in the morning at Ipswich, having done 20 tapes, all individually done for the players, but they're all on VHS.
Yeah.
And younger people may not realize that it's great now digitally. You just dump the file inside like 30 seconds. We had to actually tape to tape all of this stuff, so it took hours.
Yeah.
So the development in all that stuff now is crazy.
Yeah. So that most recent role then, head of performance and and health, Dave, at Millwall.
Yeah.
So can we kind of just go over what was an average week like for you? Because again, everyone will know, like, working in the Football League is quite a hectic schedule. Most weeks are double game weeks, so you've got the Tuesday and the Saturday. So what did an average week look like with you in terms of working with the players, the staff, but also those other disciplines that you mentioned, and other members of staff in the club?
Okay, so if I start, say, after the game, and then work all the way through to start next game. So immediately after the game, having some of the players are going to have to do some conditioning. The rest of the team who started or played the majority of the game are doing into recovery work. Immediately, I'll be on to getting GPS data. We work as a team. There's no kind of, at that stage, there isn't a hierarchy. Everyone's got a role to do. And my role at that stage, which I took upon myself, is I'm getting all the GPS stuff. That's getting uploaded onto the web so that we can very, very quickly produce a report for the manager and the coaches as soon as we can, to give them insight into what we've just done. So obvious ones: how far have we run? How did we run? Who did what? When did they do it? What was the effect of the scoreline on the game, and so on and so forth. So we'll box that off. That then gets shared around. Normally we try and have that in everybody's hand within 30 minutes of the game. So pretty quick workflow, and that includes also trying to get the stuff off the players who've just finished. So it can be pretty hectic, but we get an overarching document to the manager, summary within 30 minutes, maximum of an hour. Then I'll try and drive home, and then when I get home, I'll say hello to the family, and then by that stage, you're then starting to move into preparation for my performance report. So it's not unique necessarily by any means, but it's quite rare. So I will bring together all of the different elements that we have in performance, and try and put them into a document that is essentially one version of the truth, or the version of the truth that we're going to work off. So all of the data comes into me. I produce the report. I share the report to everyone. So that continues kind of reasonably late into a Saturday night. Although it will have a cutoff, like you do have to have social time. So, but I'll set up most of the data when I get back. That'll take about an hour. Then Sunday morning, I'm up early, and then from about 8 till 11, I'll produce the report. It's well presented, it's detailed, but it's something that everybody can then work off. So that actually comes in at sometimes about 120 pages. But it's got all of the detail that everyone might need. So if somebody in the rehab department wants to look at the progression of their player over the last 20 weeks, they can see all of that. But if the coach also wants to see how much S&C work has been done by X player in the last period of time, he can also see that. So that's the reference that everyone can work off. And then Monday, we're straight into kind of our, I'll also share to all of the players, all of their reports. So from my perspective, we used to do a joint document where it was technical and physical data got sent out to reports, but then we said, I suppose the analysts need to do some work. so they can get busy sharing out the technical report. I'll share a physical report with all of the players who played, so they'll get their own specific numbers. And we spent a lot of time over the last number of years making sure that this design is important. We know where the players live, which is on their phones. So if they're on their phones, then we need to be able to share onto this side of the screen, and hopefully in that format. So it's a portrait orientated report, but it's got all the detail, so they can literally see on the phone, and then it's tap. They can have all the detail, and then the rest of the week it kind of flows into. Monday is review. I'll sit with the manager early. We'll have a medical meeting where we'll review all the players in terms of where they are, who's concerned, who needs to be managed, who's fit, who needs additional, the progress of the rehabbing players. And then our week is normally pretty traditional English kind of periodized week. Monday, restart, and topping up of the players who haven't played. Tuesday is our big day, extensive running, high speed sprint work. That's our big conditioning day, big spaces, large numbers of players. So yeah, a pretty tough day. We have targets that we like to achieve or surpass. I suppose if they're targets, why would you surpass them? But sometimes we do. We're not going to spare the rod to spoil the child. It's a tough day. The players will have gym on a Monday and on a Tuesday, Wednesday off. Thursday, we kind of flip then into preparation mode for the following game. So it's quite tactical. There is some intensive work that we do on those days. So 1v1s, 2v2s, 3v3, small area stuff. We start to get a little bit more explosive. And Fridays are your traditional, planning for the game the following day. Boxing off all the kind of logistics, which are going to happen to that. They will have happened before anyway, but everybody's ready for Friday. And probably by that stage, I've already done 3/4 of the data collection ready for the report of the weekend. And then when it comes to match day, it's pretty much a standard process of what my responsibilities are on those days. I've always had and been fortunate to have good staff at most of the clubs where you can allow them to get on with maybe some of the more, I wouldn't say necessarily menial, but jobs that need doing, and getting drinks containers ready, getting post-match food ready, and protein shakes. That's the great thing about the expansion of the industry, is those are looked after. And then I suppose one of the big things that's changed in the last 10 years is having live GPS available to us, and having a larger number of subs means we can construct around how we're going to use substitution strategy through a game by looking at live data. So we've, for the last kind of 4 years, broken games down into 5-minute sections, and then we're able to look at player decay over that time. So at some stage, certainly at halftime, I'll give the manager an overview as to where I think we are physically. Intensity of the game. Most people think they can see it with their eyes. Sometimes they're really surprised when you say this game is off the charts, and they're thinking, didn't see that. Or some individual has been highly stressed in the game. So he's already got an idea at halftime who we might need to look at as a substitution. So it gives him that kind of bandwidth to think, how am I going to format the change? Is it going to affect the shape, the formation, the tactics? What if something else happens, at a basic level, the scoreline changes, but also who can I put onto the pitch? And then we roll on to the end of the game, and it's shake hands and back to the start again.
Yeah, nice. So obviously a lot of that data then is coming from the GPS devices, the wearables that that obviously all the players will wear now. So when did they become a thing, Dave? When were they introduced into your workflow? What and kind of, I'd be interested to know what they were like when they first came, what kind of data and metrics they were able to deliver then to what they're now looking like, and how that's changed and developed over time.
Yeah, so if I go back to the very start, it was all heart rate based. And then my first exploration with this stuff, again, being inquisitive and trying to drive things and looking at the tech, at Norwich, we had a technology link up with Lotus, the car maker, because they're literally about 3 miles from me here. So one of my runs is down to the Lotus factory and back. But because they had their foot in Formula One and rallying and all those kind of stuff, we worked with a company called Pi Research and Lotus to start looking at player tracking, which wasn't heart rate. It was how can we actually measure. So one day down at the training ground, I think we had radar, we had like some early kind of form of LiDAR. So this is, I think, 2004. We already saw something coming. I had at that stage an old GPS tracker for my car, for the old TomToms, if anyone's old enough to remember that. But you could buy off the internet like a 1 hertz GPS tracker. So I thought, well, why can't we put that onto a player? And then we started looking at it then. In reality, GPS really started to come around 2010, 2011 at Colchester. We couldn't afford it. It wasn't something that we were able to get into our ecosystem. So it wasn't until really 2013, 14, I started really looking into GPS a lot. Other people were far further on than I was. But once we got to Birmingham and it was really well established there, then we did really kick it on. And of course, now you've got other optical tracking stuff. So excuse me. Ironically, what Prozone were doing in the early 2000s, we were actually given the opportunity to be one of the pilot clubs with Prozone while I was at Norwich, because we were being quite innovative with sports science and tech. And for some reason, somebody at the club decided that technology isn't for us. Right. Okay, so we'll leave that there. But I was pushing it. We didn't have it. Obviously, then Prozone came in, and I think 2 years later we were paying over 100 grand a year to access Prozone. But that probably gave us the advantage now of been having some kind of game metrics. Once we got GPS, then we knew, right, we've got something for training here. But at that stage, you couldn't wear them in games. And then FIFA obviously said you can start wearing this stuff in games now. So it was great because now we had one kind of version of the truth for the player tracking. We weren't comparing Prozone and GPS. But of course, then we've had other revolutions. We've had TrackAb, we've had Second Spectrum, we've got Hawkeye, and we've got various other new tools as well that are on the scene, which I'm speaking with a couple of companies now, which I think are going to be even more interesting to start looking at, because the optical stuff is probably getting to the point where it's almost as accurate as we're seeing from the GPS stuff. And I think at that stage, then it becomes, well, why can't you have this everywhere? If it's simple camera stuff. So yeah, it's been a fascinating development of GPS. We use it as a tool to support what we see. We also use it as a correctional lens to what we see as well. Because while people think that, I remember speaking with George Burley, and George Burley telling me, because this was the first time video was being used, and he says, I can see everything with my eyes. And Tony Mowbray was the one who was pushing this kind of video stuff. Tony was really inquisitive about it. And I think it was only 3 games later where then, the manager was looking at it going, right, I couldn't see that. Show it to me. He saw it. Then he realized. And I think that's always the thing with new technologies. They have to sometimes prove their worth, and it's easy for someone like myself to come in and say, we've got a great new tool over here, we should definitely buy it. For people who are going to have to interact with it and maybe are signing off the check, they want to know that this is going to add value in a positive way, rather than just, we found a new tool to beat the players with. So GPS, I think at the start wasn't necessarily used correctly. It was used as a kind of stick to beat people with, look, not running far enough. Similar to Prozone, Sam Allardyce used to say, allegedly, that if you did run 10K, you weren't going to be in the team. So you had like goalkeepers, UC Askelainen running up and down like the box because he had to get to 6K. And they delay corner kicks because the players could use the extra little bit of time while the corner kick was waiting to be played to like just run and get another kind of 100 meters. Madness.
So, I mean, on that kind of tracking and wearables, do you have any experience like in terms of sleep, like tracking sleep? I know there's lots of kind of things you can do now, like the wearables for that. Does that come into play in the clubs that you've worked at, or can you see that being a thing more for the future?
So we then get into a real interesting area around, when does the player separate from the person?
Yeah.
And when does the athlete, where's the boundary between them living their life as a person or them living their life as an athlete? And certainly in some sports, some leagues, it's accepted that while you're part of NBA team X or NFL team Y, we are paying you serious money, and part of that is that we get access to your data while you're on roster with us. Now, part of the collective bargaining agreements that they have in those leagues mean that's fine while we're on roster and while we're in season, but the rest of the time you're not going to get anything. You can't even contact the players. And I think football's got to be really careful, as like other sports, is how deep you want to go with some of this stuff. Now, we would track sleep either through players giving a voluntary response to that. How long was the sleep? How well did they sleep? Was it broken? Why was it broken? And that'll be everything from a well-hydrated athlete getting up in the middle of the night to go to the loo, or a player who's got young children who's going to have disturbed sleep because the children woke up. I suppose we get more concerned where we see, if they're being honest, players who have lack of sleep because lifestyle choice is lack of sleep, 6 hours, 5 hours. I've seen those. I've also seen players log that they did 12 hours sleep, and that's even more of a concern because now they're either seriously tired or they're lying or they can't tell the difference in numbers. So there's some education to happen there. But yeah, some of the technologies that are out there, like Oura Ring or Whoop bands, or even the Apple Watch, can now do some nice monitoring. It's about buying into the player. I know of horror stories in the past of people asking players to wear heart rate monitors during their sleep, and let's just say that not all members of the family were positive about it.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, one thing I did want to ask you about, Dave, was you did it was a talk around kind of private practitioners, athletes, working with people outside of the club. And I think you mentioned it's not really necessarily a new thing, but it's something that is kind of being more prevalent. Maybe it's growing. So, yeah, if you can just kind of explain what you're seeing in terms of players. Are they employing people externally from the club, and what effects that has on the club itself, people like yourself that are working in those clubs, and how that works with also sharing of data potentially as well, and kind of the concerns maybe that there might be around that.
Yeah, it's certainly exponentially growing now in football. I think it's coming from other sports. Over the years, like people like Jordan or Kobe would have personal coaches. And my being a college coach that got really close to, became a mentor over the years, and they would use these people. I suppose you've seen Formula One drivers using those type of things over the years as well, because they will move maybe every couple of years from team to team to team, and they want somebody who's going to be consistent in terms of looking after them. And I suppose they start to look at it as it's a team of I. So people say there's no me and team, but there is certainly an I when it comes to, I'm the athlete. I need to be in the best shape I can be and looked after the best I can be to achieve what I want to achieve. And that could be trying to win championships. It could be making a lot of money because of your contracts. It may be staying in the industry. So players have probably now reflected on the fact that if you're in a football club, like your average professional football club would have 25 first team players, but they may have 3 physios. Nowadays, you might have 3 physios. And of course, back in the day, it may be just 1 physio. So they've gone, well, I want I want treatment, or I want attention. And they go to the physio room, and there's like 3 people on the beds. All the beds are full. There's 2 people waiting, and they're going, well, how long am I going to have to wait to have this treatment? And it might be come back in an hour. And some of them have just got to the point where they're like, I'm not hanging around waiting for the guy to be free, and then he might have to have lunch, and I'll have to come back at 2:00, in which case I could have come in, got changed, got my car, gone to a facility, have somebody who's just going to work on me and not worry about anyone else, and I'll turn up at my time and I'll be straight in. And I think that's where they've gone. And whether it's a personal chef, personal medic, personal analyst, S&C coach, somebody who's doing concierge services for you in terms of booking your holidays, looking after your car, your lifestyle, all of those things now are within the realm of players because of what their earning potential is. And also they can run themselves as a business. So all of these things are probably tax deductible anyway, because if you're employing staff, So you can now make use of a personal chef if you want to. And I know quite a few people who operate on that side of the fence. I think our greatest challenge inside a club is, what is the player doing with who, when, and how is that going to affect us when they come back? The really good practitioners on the outside are engaging with us. They're being proactive. They're having the conversations. While we're not going to give them the detail of a training session, of course we're not. Sometimes we don't even tell the players what we're training, and that sometimes does their head in. Why can't we be told? But certainly with the external practitioner, the good ones are interacting with us. What can I do that's not going to affect the player towards the game of the weekend? Because the player may not know what's coming up. So they'll turn up, not know what's planned, decide to do a session, and then when they turn up the following day, they're either repeating or doubling up on what we had planned anyway, or they're not in a great condition to do what we want. Yeah. And that's where the grey area starts to become really difficult, because we'll look at the player and think, he looks sluggish or he's not on it. And that might affect his selection. Yeah. Now the player, for doing right, is also inhibiting himself. So where we really need to sort this out is, and this is something we've tried to do at clubs, is try and at least have the bargaining and agreement of the player that whatever they do on the outside, we'll know about and they'll share. Yeah. We'll share as much information as we can to make sure that it's not conflicting with our work, and that the data can be shared both ways. Please send us back what you're doing. We'll send you as much as we can on the way out. And certainly there are companies now who are going to look at that kind of whole GDPR and the players' access to their own data. And we'll be pushing this, that clubs will have to send data to the player for the player to be able to use however they want. Essentially, it is their data. But also, that's going to affect us in terms of working practice, because if we then have 20, 25 players who are all going to different people at different times, and we have to externally, support that kind of work, that's going to be challenging. And it's going to add another huge layer of information that we have to share and then recollect and integrate into our systems in order to look after the players. So while it's great the players are investing in themselves and trying to do things the best, it is going to be a challenge for all of us to make sure that that's serviced in the right way.
Yeah. Again, this might be a naive question, Dave, but the data, is it shared between like the clubs and the national teams? If a player goes and plays internationally, are you getting that back at the club from what happened when they're away?
Generally speaking, yes. It just depends how mature the systems are at whatever organization they go to. Different GPS providers attack it in different ways. So, for example, if you're sending a player away with England, England have got a nice system where they're effectively guiding you through. So if you're with Catapult or you're with StatSports or you're with VX as a GPS provider, then they'll almost have said, right, go into your system. This is what you need to set up to do an export to us. And we will send it back in whatever database format you want to go back into yours. Something like StatSports have an integrated system, so you can almost partner with. So if I'm at Club X and then players going to England, all I do is release that information to England, however far back it needs to go. And similar, when they finish the sessions there, that can be automatically sent back in. That's a really nice system that StatSports do. With Catapult and some things like that, it's not as easy to do that, but a lot of clubs anyway are taking the data out of those proprietary software systems, and everyone's building their own database anyway. So as long as the format that it's sent back in matches what you need, it's really easy to do. Some organizations are really, really basic. You'd be surprised really at an international level that some of the countries, like what they send you back is pretty basic. And if I was getting that inside a club, that it's not fit for purpose. So there is a challenge that the kind of the spectrum of information that you're getting shared back can be everything from really, really basic. Like I've at times had to go back to international colleagues and say, like, is this correct? And then you realize that they haven't even sent the correct report, for correct player with the correct data. And you're just thinking, this is the international level is supposed to be the pinnacle of the game, certainly for the players. But you do wonder, have they got the best practitioners operating at those levels? Don't forget the kaleidoscope of players and nationalities we have now means some countries have nothing. Like literally, we're not going to ask for anything, and we're not going to send you anything. We don't even wear GPS, and we don't track anything. So you might as well just like stick your finger in the air and guess.
Yeah, definitely. That's really interesting. What we'll do, Dave, okay, I could talk to you about all that stuff for many, many hours, but I want to speak about a little bit about kind of employment and advice for younger practitioners, if possible. So just on that, I mean, you mentioned on your LinkedIn profile, it says something about kind of mentoring younger practitioners. I did want to ask a question about kind of mentorship because, well, the first question I will ask: have you had any mentors over time, and do you have your mentors now? And people, you mentioned a couple of people throughout the conversation, but is anyone that sticks out really to be that you would class as a mentor?
Oh, 100% Joe Dunbar is my mentor. If I had a blue plaque to put up here behind me, it would be went through the Joe Dunbar not only probably school of like performance, but a lot of life guidance as well. When you come sometimes. Let's say recently had a job opportunity come up since I left Millwall, and I've kind of got three people who I'll probably call. Joe's certainly probably going to be the first one outside of my family. Obviously, my wife gets the first call, but Joe would be number one on the list of who I'd call up because he's got such vast experience within sport anyway. He's an unbelievable practitioner, so. In terms of guiding my practice. Now, while Joe isn't on a pitch anymore, and the stuff he's doing with saliva stuff is like world-leading, groundbreaking stuff. He understands professional sport as well as anyone I've spoken to. So when it comes to big decisions or me thinking through it, you can sit there on your own and think you'll get it right. But it's amazing sometimes if you've got somebody who you've had a long relationship with. He knows all about my family. He knows everything. He was a lecturer at St Mary's when I went there in '92. So all over those like 30 odd years, he's been there. Like sometimes we won't speak in weeks. Other times we'll speak in multiple times during a week. So I can bounce anything off him. And, sometimes he'll say like with this recent opportunity come up, he was just like, I don't think it's right for you. I just don't think it's the right opportunity for you to do now. It just it was already kind of feeling like that in some ways to myself, but he was just able to, he said, you don't have to listen to me, which of course that's the great thing about a mentor. You can take their advice or not, but he just fed back in such a clear way, and because he knows the other parts of your life. Because not every mentorship call has to be trading information, and it can just be a conversation. Because I suppose it's a little bit like looking through binoculars, isn't it? You look through binoculars when you want to see something, but you're only going to see whatever's in focus and is in direct line of sight. Whereas what you need to build up is the widest possible perspective of the person. So what are the likes and dislikes, the lifestyle, background. That's why when we jokingly said about my social media before we started, when you look at my social media, you're going to get the rich kaleidoscope of my life. That's how I use social media. I don't just use it for professional work. In fact, I was speaking to somebody last week and saying, if people are now just looking at your social media to be your calling card for your work, and that's what they're going to potentially judge you on, well, I'd find people who are just posting about professional stuff and just their work probably a turn off, because I have no idea about the rest of this person. So what am I buying into here? He could be presenting the best form of himself in order to get a job, whereas actually behind the scenes, that person is not particularly nice, and I don't agree with their views. And if I don't agree with their views, I may, in other parts of life, that might be not somebody I want to work with. So that's why I would say getting a mentor and investing in that. I mean, I think about, obviously people call it mentorship. I'd probably look at it as like, it's kind of like coaching though. We're all coaches, in which case, let me coach you, coaching is far more about just the technical elements of it, which is saying, so, am I a mentor to someone, or can I help coach them in this world? And I probably look at myself as that kind of performance coach, or, I can help coach people in this kind of industry. So definitely, I think if you can find a mentor, it doesn't have to be a paid mentor. It doesn't have to be somebody you have to go out there and like buy a service. Find someone you think can help you. I did it myself when I was commuting. I opened up my car journeys to people if they wanted to have half-hour chats, and I'd weeks and weeks and weeks of people like just 6 o'clock in the morning while I'm on the road having half-an-hour chats with people from all over the place, different countries, who just say, yeah, can I have a half an hour at like 6:30 just to talk about something? And I never charged anybody for that. I might have to change that now though.
Yeah. So because I think that can be a thing that people wonder, how do they get a mentor? How do they just approach someone and ask them to be a mentor? Is it more about building the relationship over like a longer period of time, I suppose, and getting to know that person? Because at the end of the day, like you said, you're spending a lot of time with these people. It's not just about their technical skills, it's about what kind of a person they are as well. You mentioned obviously Twitter there, and your social media, Dave. There was one tweet I just wanted to bring up. So,
oh dear,
no, nothing too bad. Scroll down through all the, like you say, you do share lots of stuff on there. So this one here that I'm looking at, it was you did a poll, Dave. So I don't know if you remember this one, but it was you want a shortcut to get ahead in the industry fast. What's the best strategy? You gave the options of befriending athletes, working at a winning club, maximize your social media, and then do all qualifications. Obviously, you're probably limited to just 4 things on the poll, but the thing that came out on top was work at a winning club. I wanted to basically ask you if you agree with the results of the poll, and what were your thoughts on those answers and why you included them ones in there, really.
I suppose this was a tongue-in-cheek poll where, all of the answers are possibly not correct, because it's people thinking about how they build their profile to look as good as possible, as quick as possible. So looking at the industry in recent years, how do you build profile to get yourself known? We understand, maybe I've got survivor bias in that I'm already an established, long-serving practitioner, with a good body of work behind me. So maybe I have to look at it, through a different lens. But watching kind of recent trends is, if I can get players saying that I'm doing a great job and I can post that somewhere, that's essentially an endorsement of me. We recently had an intern at one of the clubs, and he didn't last very long, like weeks, if even that. And I then came across their social media, one of their social media channels, and they had got a quote from a player saying what great work the player had done, or what the practitioner had done with this player, helped me out with this and that and the other. And I went to the player and said, do you know that this person has said this about you? And they were like, well, he said, could I give him an endorsement? I said, like, just put something on your website. But literally what he had written was nowhere near what his role was. Like, he literally was an intern coming in to learn, and ends up almost saying that, I've changed this guy's career. So that's a concern, where you're kind of over embellishing, or certainly embellishing your role, or trying to use your association with players to make yourself look better than maybe you are, because you're trying to climb the ladder so quickly. We understand, that it's a competitive market out there, and you've got to do something that looks a little bit different. So is that just get yourself to the best club you can be and win things, in which case there's going to be a picture of you with a trophy, like that's great. I've got a medal here on the wall behind me, but I'd also like to think hard earned. And I'm not saying other people aren't hardworking, but you can very quickly associate yourself with success where your contribution might be very, very little. But notwithstanding that, then with the other things, I can't remember what the other two were. So there was befriending an athlete, work at a great club, work hard on your social media. So, do great graphics, post all the great things that you're doing, constantly sharing stuff that you're doing in the gym on video. Is like, I suppose I equate it to the Thierry Henry quote. I think it was Thierry Henry. Does a postman celebrate every time he delivers a letter? Does the postman take a video every time he goes and posts a letter through his, like, look here, I'm posting a letter. It's not. Do you have to show me every time you do a gym workout? Great. If you're a professional S&C coach, I expect that you're doing gym workouts. I don't need you to show me like you're doing a deadlift. Great. That's just get on with it. And I think the last one was doing all the qualifications. I suppose the last one is if you've done all the qualifications, at least you should be able to talk the game. Whether you're able to walk the game is a different challenge. So yeah, there was a little bit of tongue in cheek. I think in essence, the answer should be in the comments, which is, it's not really any of those. It's about learning to do the job really well. And that's not done by necessarily spending all your time on social media or befriending all the athletes. You do need to build up relationships, but not to the point where you're trying to use it to just further your own self.
Yeah, definitely. And just one more on kind of for younger practitioners and kind of people that are looking to learn their trade and following the steps of someone like you, Dave. So technical skills aside, what would you say soft skills that you possess, or maybe you would advise other people to work on to be able to forge such a good career in sport?
I mean, the soft skills area is so important. It depends on who you're having to necessarily interact with. Not everybody needs to have the soft skills in equal kind of balance. It's almost like an old school graphic equalizer or mixing desk, So knowing characters. Let's look at different roles. I face the players all the time. I face them in different situations. I see them in stressful situations where we've lost a game and they need picking up. I need to also motivate them in a warm-up the day before a game. I need to be able to manage them when they're in a space where they don't want to do whatever we're doing. They're not in a good place themselves, family issues, whatever. So they're very different skill sets. And some of those skills you only gain in life with time. Sometimes having empathy with somebody who's having issues with children is easier if you have children. Now, not everyone's blessed to have kids. Not everyone chooses to have kids, but there's certainly a different perspective you get as you go through life. And having empathy with people is one of the biggest ones, understanding that for athletes at the competitive age or for managers who are stood on the side of a pitch, their pressures are very, very different to mine. So empathy is important. Also understanding the different roles that people have in the organization. So, for example, we now have data scientists coming into the organizations. A lot of those people would be on the classic personality profiling of quite blue people, so they're kind of quite thoughtful. You need to give them all of the detail. You need to give them time and space to be able to go away and work with that and allow them. But when they come back, they probably don't need to be presenting in front of groups. They might need just one-to-one interaction. And how you communicate with those people, you need to know that when I'm approaching them, that they're not people you can run into and just start demanding stuff and demand it immediately. Whereas if you're dealing with somebody who's quite fiery red type, you better get in with the appropriate level of detail, deliver it fast, and be ready for quick answers and have quick solutions with you at the time, because these are decision makers. They act fast. They fire off hot. And then you look at other spectrums of people, the kind of, quite earthy people, the quite motivational type, who'll be quite bouncy and loud versus other people. So understanding how you're going to communicate with different styles of people who have got different roles, you're going to have those skill sets, right? With this person, I'm going to be empathetic. With that person, I need to be fast acting. I need to motivate that person. This person is all about the team and we. So that's something to understand, the psychology of communication, I think. I work on it every day. I actually used a psychologist when I was at Norwich to critique me on my coaching. And I asked him to be pretty brutal about it. I said, I don't want any kind of sparing of the, what would you call it? Yeah, be as direct as you want to be. Don't spare the rod to spoil the child here. if I've not already used that terminology. But it was the best. It was the best week I invested. He watched me for a week while I was at the club, and then we sat down the following week, and he gave it to me warts and all, because that's how I wanted to be fed back. Kind of a bit of an old school, me as an athlete, like just tell me straight, and then I can cope with it and deal with it. I may not like it, but at least I'll know. And he delivered it back to me in such a way which was challenging, but it was, insightful. And to this day, I still use all of the tools and feedback that he gave me in that, because I was willing to say to someone, coach me, critique me. So going back to the mentoring bit, that was a great insight. And talking of insight, I've had a couple of insights profiles done in it as well. And I think there's so much feedback you can get from self-reflection, but also having something else observe you, and because we all have scotomas or blind spots around things that we do, how we speak, who we speak to, how we speak to them, which means that if we don't embrace that, we may inhibit our opportunities to develop. And sometimes it's funny, years later you'll bump into players and athletes or coaches, and they'll give you an insight, maybe something about your practice or your character that you didn't realize was there at the time. That can be both positive and negative. And sometimes you wish that you had known that at the time, because you could really have done with that information, because it might have unlocked something better in the group or in yourself to improve your practice.
Yeah, perfect. One thing I do like to ask everyone, Dave, is do you have any recommendations for any books, podcasts? Doesn't have to be sports science related, just anything that you want to give a shout out to, anything that you think other people will benefit from that you consume.
Great book, not widely available, I don't think. It's called The Shackleton Way. So I'm a big fan of Ernest Shackleton, who was the Arctic explorer or Antarctic explorer, more polar explorer, back in the turn of the 1900s. And some of his lessons around leadership, really insightful. Again, not in the sporting context, in a completely different area, but again, around team psychology. So that would be my kind of book recommendation. Podcast wise, I mean, there's so many now, aren't there? Actually, we're looking at doing our own podcast soon, so more news on that to come. But yeah, podcasts I enjoy. I mean, different types of ones. So I like, for some humor, football cliches, because I think that's just a insightful look behind the scenes of kind of the whole genre of football. So that's pretty good. I've always been a fan of Seth Godin from a kind of marketing kind of perspective. So I've subscribed to his blog for a long number of years now. So it'd certainly be a good blog for people. You get a daily email from him. And again, just really interesting ways of looking back at, sometimes it'll be really short, sometimes really long, about random stuff. And then you sit there and you go, like, that's really, really clever. So that's a good one. Two Coaches and a Coffee, which has just started up on whatever your podcast provider would be, which is Darren Burgess and Jason Weber out in Australia. Again, nice short format podcast. So if you're on a short commute or you're doing a little bit of exercise, you just want something. And again, I like that because they just talk about contemporary things that have kind of been in the news. And certainly Training Ground Guru is a great podcast, because the depth that you can go into on some of the podcasts, like whether it's neuroscience or it's coaching or it's performance, whatever it might be. But again, for someone who's worked a long time in the football industry, I think Training Ground Guru is fantastic.
Perfect. Yeah, definitely check those ones out. I mean, that's everything, Dave. Like I say, we've got to wrap it up. I think we've done an hour or so now. So, is there anything that you want to give a shout out to? In fact, what's next for Dave? I know you're not attached to a club at the moment, but I'm sure you're busy plotting your next adventure.
Oh yes, lots going on. It's amazing. Almost been busier since I've been out of work than I was when I was in work. But I suppose it gives you more opportunities to explore. As I said last week, I took some time for family, which is great, and now get my teeth into all the things that I'd like to look at. And as I said, because my interest is around a lot of the stuff in performance, having those opportunities to have discussions, because I suppose not being attached to a club means sometimes people are able to approach you about other projects. because there's no barrier to me working with them at the moment. So that's been really, really good, you know. So I've seen some stuff in the last 3 weeks that I don't think I would have seen if I was at a club still, because of that. I suppose sometimes the non-disclosure stuff means that if you're in a club, they're a bit nervous because they can quite easily get out of a club some things that are going on, because sometimes there's loose lips when people see things going on. So that's been great, yeah. And yeah, looking towards, I might even have a Christmas at home. So that could be interesting, because I don't know how to do that really. I've only had one in like 26, 27 years, I think. Myself and my wife were talking about the other day. Like, I don't know really getting through a whole Christmas day at home. And I've never done a whole Christmas day since Stephen's Day, Boxing Day, whatever you want to call it, kind of back to back. I think I've done it once in like nearly 30 years probably. So that's going to be good fun. But and then into the new year again, I've got a few things that people have asked me to do, some small projects which are exciting, which may open up new opportunities. And then who knows, maybe my iDrills app will reappear in a different form. Watch this space.
Exciting, nice. Yeah, I'll do so. I'll put some links down below. I'll obviously link I'll link your profile and stuff like that, so people can check you out further. But Dave, listen, really appreciate your time. It's been great to chat. If anyone's got any questions, feel free to leave in the comments below. But wherever you do end up next, Dave, all the best. I'm sure you'll be an asset to whichever club it is.
Thanks, Chris. Love talking to you, and good luck to everyone who listens to the show.
Cheers, Dave. Thanks. Bye bye.